Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Peace with Dementia podcast. My name is Matt Estrade. I'm a gerontologist, and I work with busy families to help them find solutions for their situations. And today, I'm very pleased to be joined by our guest, Dr. Jennifer Stetler, who we will get to know more in a moment. Before we get into that, I want to tell you that this episode is sponsored by my other podcast and endeavor. That's the Peace with Dementia Rosary podcast and website and everything. And specifically, I want to show you the final commissioned artwork from Norman Fauché. We had this done especially for the ministry, and it is available in prayer cards. In this case right here, I'm holding up an 8x10.5 print that's available with matting. So all of this you can find at dementiarosary.com. And as well as the other podcast over there. So support that ministry for those who are of faith. I think it's going to be a very special part of your journey. So I'm very pleased to be here with Dr. Jennifer Stetler, as I mentioned. She's also known as the Oil Doctor, PsyD, and is a clinical psychologist, dementia expert, and Johns Hopkins Press author who specializes in dementia care. She has 20 years of experience in the healthcare field and over a dozen in the senior living industry. She's a certified dementia practitioner and certified Alzheimer's disease and dementia care trainer through the National Council for Certified Dementia Care Practitioners. After her own mental health journey, Dr. Stetler quickly realized the power of non-pharmacological tools and therefore dedicated her career to educating others on the power of having these tools in their hands. She spent the first half of her career helping those with mental health concerns. And during this next part of her career, Dr. Stetler dedicated the last 12 years to exploring, researching, creating, and trialing the innovative dementia care techniques to bring professionals and caregivers the latest tools to equip them for success. She then opened NeuroEssence LLC with her business partner, and they launched the Dementia Connection Institute in 2022. Dr. Stetler is the CEO of Neuroscience LLC and the Dementia Connection Institute, and is the innovator and creator of the Dementia Connection model that we'll talk about. And she's a master trainer for the Dementia Connection Specialist Certified Trainer Certification Program. And she's also the author of The Busy Caregiver's Guide to Advanced Alzheimer's Disease. And that is what brings her here on the podcast today. Dr. Stetler, welcome to the Peace with Dementia podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start with how you got started on this journey. You allude to some of it in the introduction, but tell us about how you got into this field. We usually have an interesting story, all of us.
Absolutely. So my journey is, really started young for me. As I mentioned in my biography, that I actually went through my own mental health journey in my late teens, early 20s. And for me, I quickly realized that, sure, I was utilizing medication here and there as needed, but really what was the sticking point for me was using non-pharmacological interventions, or what we called coping tools, right? And so that really was a mainstay for me throughout my mental health journey, and really was what brought me success. And so I realized I want to be able to give back, So after high school, I decided to go into the psychology studies in college and earn my degree, both an associate's, bachelor's, master's, and of course, doctorate degree in clinical psychology, really to give back and show people that the power is in your hands, and education really helps to formulate those tools and those insights. So when I dedicated my first half of my career in mental health, I was working in a variety of settings. And then I kind of just fell into senior living like most of us do. I was fresh out of my doctorate program, and I had completed my postdoctoral fellowship, and started working in nursing homes. And so I was working with those with mental health challenges in nursing homes here in the Midwest. and then really started to show a lot of dedication and leadership to this particular organization that I was consulting with. And from there, I kind of rose the ranks, if you will, and started to oversee other kind of programs. And dementia was one of them. And so when I started to work alongside those who are living with dementia and the staff members, their families, it was really eye-opening to me to understand how much is still needed in this industry, and what I can bring from what my previous kind of part of my career, how can I bring that into this part? The Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services were screaming, non-pharmacological tools, you must use them. And a lot of people didn't really understand what those were, how to get a hold of them, how to use them. And so at that point, I said, I think I have something here. And so the other piece of it too is I learned very quickly that staff in skilled nursing facilities and assisted livings, they aren't taught about what is dementia in their own schooling. And so I was shocked by this. So many nurses and CNAs that I worked with said, I would never even learn what it was until I started to work here. And so it was just astonishing to me that administrators and executive directors of these organizations, these facilities, are required to be, the educator of this for what should already be knowledge when you're coming into this industry, and it's not. So another point of reason why I said there's something I can do here. And so at that point is when I started to really work alongside the staff, and when families would come in, and really taught them various ways that they can connect to that person with dementia. And we just found so many positive results. And so my journey is unique in that it started off in a personal way. But then as it transitioned into senior living, it was something that I really just fell in love with, and I've been doing it ever since. So.
Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting. So many of us, we are pulled into a vocation just by the very fact that we've had our own challenges in the past. Mm-hmm. Yours with your journey, mine with having a grandfather who had dementia. Mm-hmm. These are not things that we would have wanted or asked for, but that is exactly what kind of catapults in us to then help so many people. So mm-hmm. I'm grateful that you're in this vocation.
Thank you.
Writing a book is really hard. So I know from experience. And so tell me, what led you to take that leap?
Well, actually, I've been wanting to write a book since I was 18. I said this was going to be one of my lifelong goals, mm-hmm. and I didn't know what I would write it on. I had so many topics over the years, it just never came into fruition. And so when I started to work alongside the staff, and the families would come in, and just understanding what their pain points were, what they understood about the disease, what they did not understand about the disease, and just seeing time and time again, just, poor connections, just because the person who's really the caregiver doesn't understand what's really going on. And so when I said to myself, I've got something here, I just didn't quite know what it was. And so I networked with a lot of people. I attended a lot of conferences. I gained a lot of knowledge myself just to learn more about the industry. And for me, it was putting that information into a digestible form that staff and caregivers can truly understand what's going on. And when I started to see light bulbs going off and the excitement of these caregivers, I said, there's something underlining here. And, I started to come home when I had just had my son, and then pregnant with my daughter. And so through this journey of having children, I was realizing there was a connection between those with advanced dementia and young adolescents. And so that connection really kind of drew me to understand more and research and research and research. And that's when I really started to come upon some really profound information that helped to really build the platform of the Dementia Connection model. And so as it evolved over literally a 10-year period, I said, I want to write a book about this type of approach. Didn't know what I would call it. And so I put together a book proposal, and I actually disseminated it to several publishing companies, and I was denied. So you're right, it's hard. I was denied by several publishing companies, and I was about to give up. And my husband said, do not give up. You have something here. So he looked up more companies for me, and Johns Hopkins was on the list. And so I said, all right, I'll give it a go. And I did. And I remember the day that they called me, they said, we want your book. We love your concept, your model. We want to back you up. And I said, wow, unbelievable. And so we did. It was about a 2-year journey of writing. A lot of the information I had here, and I also had in several like PowerPoint presentations that I had done over the years. And so it was really just kind of formulated into a relatable, digestible story. And so the book was designed really to help to have a kind of an easy read where you're learning, but you're also having some fun with it. And what the fun is really being able to take notes throughout the the chapters and whatnot. So in a workbook style. And so, that I kind of evolved through that 2-year period of what this exactly would be. But definitely it is hard because there's a lot of just being able to understand how this can be relatable to the person from all facets, but also be something that people are going to want to continue to share with each other as well. So a lot of editing, as you know, a lot of back and forth. But when it was finally done, it was just a really great experience. And within it, like some of the pictures in there are pictures of my family, pictures of my grandfather, my children are in there, so it's not just a professional endeavor, but it's definitely certainly like a personal endeavor. Like I said, I've always wanted to write one since I was 18. And so it was nice to have kind of the best of both worlds in my first book. So.
And it is really a workbook. So I look through and there's charts behind each chapter for you to take notes and to actually track before the intervention and after and along the way. So I think that's really neat. And I think that speaks to the title for Busy Caregivers. So I'm looking forward to diving into that right now. So yeah, so before we get into that framework, that 3-part framework, the pillars, you have several case studies throughout the book, which I think is helpful for professionals and for caregivers. Can we start with the case study and then we'll jump into the 3 pillars?
Absolutely. So I'm going to read the one that's it's in chapter 2 of the book, and it's about Joyce. And of course, the names are changed for HIPAA purposes, but we called her Joyce. So the title is Mary's Mother Eats Like Mary's Granddaughter. So Mary said that her mother, Joyce, typically used her fork and spoon without a problem. Then slowly over time, she noticed that her mother would hold her fork in her hand while using her free hand to bring food to her mouth. Mary didn't understand why her mother kept doing this. I encourage her to use her utensils. At times, I even find myself getting frustrated with her, Mary explained. Despite her daughter's instance that she used utensils, Joyce continued to eat with her hands. Mary found this interesting because her first granddaughter, only a year old, was eating in a similar way. She saw her granddaughter eat food with her hands and then later eat using one hand and one fork. When Joyce came into our care, Mary asked us if her mother's inability to use utensils was a normal progression of the disease and whether there was any relationship between her mother and granddaughter's similar way of eating. And so, with Joyce, was interesting that Mary, her daughter, kind of made that connection because it's exactly what was going on. And I think there's a couple of things in this story that plays out is one, Mary, the daughter, her frustration with her mother, not being able to do what she used to do. And that happens all the time with caregivers because we look at an individual and we assume that because they're 70, 75, 80, 85 years old, that they have all the skill abilities of an adult like you and I. It's hard to understand that they wouldn't have those, like where would they go, right? And so and part of it too is Mary, there's that frustration, but there's also the frustration of, oh my gosh, what's going on with my mother? And what can I do to help? And sometimes I feel like I can't help and you feel helpless, right? So there's that frustration there's a lot behind that frustration. And that's really what is kind of the things that stand out in a lot of caregiver cases, right? But then there is that progression, which is she is losing those skills that she used to have. And so that's kind of another way to kind of paint the picture of when you step yourself into the person's shoes, what is really going on with them?
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me know, do you want to jump to the second part of the case study or do you want to dive into the pillars now?
Yeah, we'll just dive into the pillars. So, So essentially, with Joyce, what was going on is there's a theory out there that maybe you've heard of called the Theory of Retrogenesis. And I know, Matt, you and I have talked about that. And the Theory of Retrogenesis was coined by Dr. Barry Reisberg through a lot of years of his research. And essentially what he found is as the person is progressing through the disease, they're actually progressing towards a developmental age of someone towards adolescence, right? And he specifically earmarked 7 years old to 4 weeks old. And that's, your late stage of moderate to late stage, right? So think about like there's early, middle, and late stage dementia. If someone's in the moderate phase, it's more towards like the end of that moderate phase and then moving into the late stage is where they're going to end up. And the idea is to understand then from the caregiver standpoint, right, is, why I include this into the dementia connection model as the first pillar is an understanding, right? It's not to say we treat people with dementia like children, or that we use certain things with them or tactics that are, indignifying or disrespectful, none of that stuff, right? The intention is to be able to place yourself in that person's shoes to say, okay, either I'm a 5-year-old, what can I do? I'm a 3-year-old, what can I do? Or I have a 5-year-old, I have a 3-year-old, what can they do, right? And I say, what can they do? Because sure, we can focus a lot on what they can't do anymore, but there are things that adolescents can do as they're building their skills, right? And so it's really an understanding to hopefully lessen the frustration of the caregiver and to come to some acceptance that the person I'm caring for, whether that's my family member or it's a resident in a senior living community, right, is not the chronological age that they are. They're developmentally much younger and they're going to keep getting younger. Now I say like there's some cool things out of this. The cool thing is you get to understand who that person was when they were eventually 20 years old, 10 years old, 5 years old. You get to understand who that person was, which for a lot of family, I always say, how can we make lemonade out of lemons, right? I know that the person that you're caring for, if it's your family, you're losing them for who they are today and who you knew of them. But let's take the nugget out, right? And the nugget is you get to understand who mom or dad was when they were a teenager, right? And you never get to know that unless they told you about it, but you don't get to experience it. And now you get to. So we had to pull some nuggets out of that, right? So it's to be able to lower frustration, to be able to gain some acceptance by really understanding that theory of retrogenesis. The key with the theory is that everything goes in reverse. We focus a lot in our industry on physical abilities, right? But it's so much more than that. It's their ability to cope. It's their ability to problem solve and to organize themselves, right? So everything literally goes in reverse. And so we have to think about that too. It's not just they can't physically take care of themselves. There's so much more behind that, right? And so there's that piece of it. So with Joyce, we could see that right? Physically, so let me kind of start with what infants, how they start to feed themselves, right? So when infants are born, the way that they are fed is that they either are given some kind of formula through a bottle, or they maybe take breast milk from the mom's breast or from a bottle as well, okay? Then from there, they eventually start to gain skills where they can hold their own bottle, right? So they have some tactile features to that. When they move into more the later stage of the year, so like around 9 months plus, 6 to 9 months, they start to be able to feed with softer foods. And so the parent will, pick up a spoon, bring it to their mouth. So they watch that over time. There's a lot of visual stimulation going on there.
Yeah.
And there might be some auditory stimulation if the child takes it in, the parent might give them an applause or cheer, or get excited, right, which reinforces them. And then they have the gustatory stimulation. If they like the food, they'll start, keep eating it, that kind of thing. And then eventually the child starts to kind of take over, right? After a year plus, they start to learn how to pick up the spoon and they put it to their mouth, right? That kind of thing. All the while they're using their hand a lot because around 9 months of age, they're given a lot of finger foods, they call them, right? So the child learns to pick up the food with their finger and they put it to their mouth. And then eventually with the spoon, they kind of do them together. And then eventually they don't use their fingers and they just use their hands. That takes some time to do that. But that's kind of the progression of how an infant to an adolescent start to eat, right? and feed themselves. So with Joyce, we started to see that, right? She was using utensils. Then she started to use a utensil, hold it, and then use finger foods, right? She would start to pick up the food with her hands, and it was making a mess. So her daughter was getting frustrated, like, why is mom using her hands? She shouldn't be using her hands. This is messy, right? But to the person with dementia, this is how they are still using their skills. This action of being able to pick up and put to mouth, right? They're doing that. How it's done, the person with dementia doesn't really care. They're just hungry. They want to eat, right? So they're doing that, right? Now, eventually, Joyce started to lose the ability to use the fork, right? So in the later part of the case study, we talk about that when she came to us, she had lost the ability to use the utensil. She was primarily just using her fingers to eat. And so when she came into our care, we quickly evaluated her for occupational therapy. Because in occupational therapy, they can utilize a lot of different skills to be able to try to regain some of those skills lost, where they can teach them how to reuse utensils again. And the utensils might look a little different. They might be a little bulkier in shape because we lose hand dexterity as we progress as well. And so Joyce was losing hand dexterity. She couldn't hold regular size forks, spoons, and knives anymore. They were too thin for her fingers. And so when we were introduced more of the adaptable equipment, which are kind of bulkier forks, spoons, and knives, it was more comfortable for her. She was able to use them. So we're able to regain some of those skills back for a period of time where she could still use utensils, but Joyce still liked to pick up the food with her fingers as well. And so we let her do that because this is her ability to stay independent, right? We
Right.
don't want to do for them when they can still do for themselves. No matter how messy it gets, it doesn't matter. We want her to retain those skills. So we reinforced it over and over again with her, right? So we get into the second pillar of the dementia connection model, which is habilitation. And that is reinforcing skills over and over with a consistent manner, right? So what we did with her was she went to occupational therapy, yes, but then we introduced for the meals, she was using those adaptive equipment every single meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, snacks, she was using them. And we were encouraging there, we were giving her other forms of stimulation too. So when we saw her using the utensils, right, and it was a appropriate moment, we would give her an applause. We would say, great job, those kinds of things, which was an auditory stimulation that she really enjoyed because we would view her face and she would smile when we would say those things. So we knew that she was really enjoying that kind of interaction. And then from there, we introduced some other kinds of stimulation into helping her to encourage her to eat. So we used olfactory stimulation, which was, we used essential oils. And so we specifically used the citrus scent, which helps to increase appetite and boost your mood. So what she was doing, we were diffusing it for every single meal, again, using habilitation. And she started to associate the citrus scent with food. So she knew when she smelled that scent, it was time to eat. So she learned that over like a 4-week period. So not only what's great about the using the various stimuli, that it's an immediate effect that occurs, but also over a period of time, they can learn this is what this stimuli means, which is great. So if you ever hear that, people say, like, people with dementia can't learn anymore, that's absolutely not true. They can, they just learn how adolescents learn. Adolescents learn by using their senses, and that's how they navigate their world in the first 5 years of life, right? So we talk about skills that they still have, right? So think about, like, how does a child learn how to eat? Like we just talked about, how does a child learn how to walk? How does a child learn how to talk? It's all based on observation, what they're seeing and hearing and tasting and touching and smelling. That's how they learn. They don't pick up a book and say, oh, this is how I start to read, or how I start to, talk, and things like that, right? So so we know that about people with dementia now. So we're going to use that to our ability, right? Is to reinforce these skills over and over and over again, so they can learn that these what the cues mean, right? Now, you heard me reference a lot of sensory based intervention, right? And that's the third pillar of the dementia connection model, is sensory based information, which comes from sensory stimuli. Okay. So what's happening is it's kind of in combination in understanding from the theory of retrogenesis what they still have, right? Is they have the ability to use their senses to some degree to navigate their world. But the second thing that we know that they still have is the ability to feel emotions. Now, unfortunately, they can't all the time tell us how they're feeling, like children. Children can't tell us how they feel often, but they show us how they feel. right? So people with dementia show us how they feel through their behavioral expressions, sometimes facial expressions that eventually diminishes, but usually behavioral expressions. But people with children, excuse me, they express themselves through their behaviors too, initially in the first 5 years of life. So very similar to that. So what happens is, from a clinical standpoint, I'm trying to bore you too much about this, but when stimuli comes into the brain, it's either directly or indirectly processed through the limbic system, okay? And I say directly or indirectly because the olfactory is the only one that's directly influenced, okay? Because the smell comes in through the nasal cavity, it's processed through the olfactory bulb into the limbic system, okay? Where with other forms of stimuli, it goes to that part of the brain first, and then it goes to the limbic system. But in the limbic system, there's two really important organs. There is the amygdala, which helps generate emotions, and the hippocampus, which helps to create memories, right? So when the stimuli comes in, it influences the limbic system, both the emotional part and the memory part, okay? So when we talk about non-pharmacological tools to use, it needs to be positive stimuli that focuses on the five senses, okay? And so you can see with Joyce, right? We used the citrus scent, which she enjoyed. Now, if your loved one or your resident, they don't enjoy the citrus scent, right? What's great about essential oils is there's other oils that can help increase appetite and boost mood. So you would just have to work with someone who knows more about essential oils. But what's great about citrus, it's kind of a benign smell. It's, most people relate to it well. But if they don't, that's okay. There's another oil for that. So we use that as a positive stimuli, right? Knowing that the intention is to try to help encourage her appetite. Like I said, we used a lot of visual stimulation where she would work with the occupational therapist. They would show her how to eat again, right? She had the tools, which was more of tactile stimulation, but being able to see her table mates, see the therapist working with her, she was able to regain those skills back, right? Yeah. We also, again, use auditory, right? Where we encouraged her a lot. We would, give her a round of applause. We would say, good job. And she absolutely loved it. A smile would go on her face. Now, had we seen her not smile or she didn't like that, we wouldn't do that again, right? That would be a negative stimuli. So that's the opposite of what we're trying to do here, right? Other things that we incorporated too from a stimuli perspective is we did use some music, and just knowing music, knowing the research behind music for people with dementia, it's just profound, has profound effects. And I specifically looked into some research that was done by Harvard University around the type of music to play based on the meal. So Harvard actually recommends that during breakfast time that you use upbeat music with words. So be something that they enjoy. So it is very personal to the person. What do they like? And the words are important because just like you and I, when we hear a song we like, we start to sing to it, whether it's in our head or it's out loud or we hum it or something like that. So in the morning, it helps to kind of start those, verbal skills. Okay. Then for lunch or around that afternoon time, they recommend upbeat music, but with no words. So a familiar term, tune that they know, but there's no words, because that point they want, they really said that people with dementia can start to be encouraged to socialize with their table mates and whatnot. And so we saw that a lot with Joyce too. And then for dinner time, they recommend non-biharmonic music or one tone. So like a flute playing or just a piano or just a guitar. And if the person may have a favorite instrument, I would go for something like that. If they are not really that music savvy, then just something that's more calming. And that's really just kind of start the relaxation period of the day where they should be calming down and things like that. So we use that consistently with Joyce every single day, 3 times a day, right? And it really did help her for quite a bit of time. And so it was just a wonderful way to apply the dementia connection model to her, where we, just to kind of do a quick review, we understood where she was coming from, because she wasn't the age that she was stated, right? She was getting younger. Right. And what were those abilities, right? She could use her senses. She could still feel emotions, right? And where was she at? In the eating skill set, she was at the point where we could still recover some of her skills. Okay, so we met her where she was at. And we did it consistently every single day. That's habilitation. Every single day we did the same routine to really bring her that sense of safety and understanding. And so she was able to learn over a 4-week period what some of these cues meant, which encouraged her to eat. And then in that, we used all those stimuli, right? So the positive stimuli to really encourage her from an olfactory standpoint, auditory, visual, tactile, gustatory. We were able to do it all with her. And she really thrived for a very long time, which was wonderful. And it not only, of course, impacts Joyce, but it impacted the staff at the facility, because when they saw that it worked, they felt like, "Ah, I actually have something I can actually use with her, and it's successful and she's happy." And what was great is over time, Joyce associated those positive feelings with the staff and the staff that used that stimuli. So they had a great connection. They were working well together. Joyce was feeling successful, the staff were feeling successful. And then when Mary would come in to visit her mom, she was just over the moon, right? She truly understood, like, wow, there are things we can do to still provide quality of life. And there are things, and even Mary can come in and she can provide some of the stimuli that we guided her with. And she had that new connection with her mom, again, that she felt she was losing, right, when she was living with her. So, this model serves so many people in this. It's like kind of like a well-rounded, approach that anybody can use, and that serves everybody, right? And you talk in my book, I talk about the win-win, right? It's a win for the person with dementia. It's a win for the person who's the caregiver. So, any questions with that you might have?
No, but I just want to emphasize for everybody, you do not need to be a professional. Like caregivers can do this.
Right.
Anybody can learn these things. They're scientific words, retrogenesis, but they are real life applications that I think people they're intuitive. That's another good thing about the framework.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as we talked about, right, it's a workbook style. So, if your loved one, or if the person you're caring for in a senior living community is struggling with eating, there's a whole chapter on eating. And at the end, you would take notes. What's working with this person? What's not working? Or if you are working in a senior living community and you're really looking at the whole community, how can we revamp, have some kind of wellness dining program, right? You can try these various things as a group, and you're going to have some residents that may not respond to it, and we can individually develop a plan for them. But all in all, I had run a focus group at an assisted living for about 3 months. And we combined all of these aspects that we work with Joyce on. So the aromatherapy, we had the music, we had we worked with therapy if needed. We utilized, different forms of like equipment and various kind of tactile things. And we found really great success as a group. What we had found, let me see if I can find the exact data, but it was something like around, so we were able to lower supplemental use. So that we had this community had a number of residents on supplements. So basically, when a resident doesn't eat all of their meal, they get a supplement to help, of course, to provide the nutrition that's needed that they're losing, because you do not want people with dementia to start losing weight. It's very difficult for them to maintain health when they're losing weight. And so with that said, we were able to actually decrease supplemental use because we saw an increase in the meal consumption, which is great. So here's the stats that from this, it was a focus group I did in 2016. And we trained the staff on the dementia connection model, and we utilized the various sensory stimuli that I talked about. And we looked at meal consumption, weight, and supplemental use over a 3-month period. By the end of the trial, 46% of residents increased their consumption of food, so about half. In addition, 54% of residents either gained or maintained weight, which was fantastic.
Wow.
And we had about 72% where we were able to decrease the supplemental use, and they were able to eat real food, which was great. So it really was, and those were the folks who were assigned to, having supplements. So it really was profound to see the effects that we had on this. And so it really kind of made the dementia connection model kind of come alive in some of these focus groups that we did. So.
Wow. Yeah. Great results with that.
Yeah.
Can you look at, can we look at the Let's look at the model, applying the model to something that many caregivers see, and that's sundowning. So could you first explain that? Because people may see it, but not know there's a name to it. And then how do you apply the model to that?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to um, start by talking a little bit about kind of put yourself in that person's shoes. Okay. So some of us, we tend to get tired as the afternoon approaches, right? I know I do. Like after I eat lunch, right around 1 o'clock, I start to get like really tired. Some of us, it might be when we're leaving work, right? And you just have that feeling like you're just feeling really exhausted and you just want to lay your head down, but you can't, right? You're driving your car home, or maybe you've got kids to pick up, or maybe you are caring for mom at home, and you're just feeling kind of irritable, right? The thing is you and I can fix that, right? We might decide, oh, if I'm driving my car, I might put my window down so the wind is blowing in my face, so it wakes me up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Or for me, I love using essential oils, so I might pull out a little peppermint and sniff it to help invigorate me, right? Um, some folks, they might eat something, right? Or they might have caffeine, like maybe a tea or maybe a coffee or something like that, right? So you and I have ways to manage that irritability as the afternoon comes on and we're getting a little tired, okay? Unfortunately, people living with dementia, they don't have those problem solving skills anymore. It diminishes over time. So what happens is they're just irritable and they're just really tired and they don't know how to deal with it. So let's use the first pillar of the dementia connection model, which is the theory of retrogenesis, right? Think about a 2-year-old, okay? A 2-year-old who has had no afternoon nap. It's approaching dinner time, and you want them to sit down and eat with, the family, and they start to get irritable. Maybe they even start to have a temper tantrum, maybe screaming, yelling. Maybe there is some fighting, slapping going on. Or maybe they throw themselves on the floor and they're, kicking and screaming kind of a thing, right? So in essence, when you think about the adolescent going through that, that's similar to what someone living with dementia is going through, because they don't know how to calm themselves or to get, rid themselves of that irritability. So they just sit in it, right? So what you might see with someone living with dementia is you might see them starting to wheel around or wander around kind of aimlessly, not quite sure where they're supposed to be, maybe asking a lot of questions. They might be start to seem angry, right? Maybe they are, you speak with them and they maybe are very curt with you, or they maybe use profanity, or maybe even they might start to, if you go to approach them, they might slap your hand or something like that, right? They might scream out, right? So what that is, it's a version of what the adolescent is going through, right? But this is the way someone with dementia shows that there's something wrong. They're irritable, they're tired. They're showing you through their behavioral expressions, their facial expressions, but they can't say to you, I'm really tired right now, I'd love to go lay down. I mean, that would be great if they could say that, but they aren't able to. Similar to how adolescents, they don't sit there and say as a 2-year-old to mom or dad, I'm really tired right now, I don't want to sit here and eat with you guys, right? I mean, that would be great if they could tell us that, but they can't. So we have to understand, put yourself in that person with dementia. They're tired, they're frustrated, they're irritable, and they don't know how to solve that. That's what's going on. So we have to provide ways for them to solve it, right? So the way that you do that is, of course, using sensory stimuli, positive sensory stimuli, right? Now we'll get into the consistent part here in a minute here, because I want to talk about the perfect day.
Yeah.
But essentially, with the positive stimuli, it's what works for them. The idea is we want to calm them down, right? And so we're going to use various stimuli that can help with that. So an example might be olfactory stimulation. If you want to use essential oils, lavender is a really great calming oil that you would diffuse. Or we use these, what's called personal diffuser dots. There's these little circles, and you can put some of the drops onto the circle, and you put it on like the lapel area, and they can smell it, right? And so that's a really calming oil that can help to start to generate that relaxation. You can also give them things that comfort them, right? So there is, we talk a lot about tactile objects, because tactile objects have kind of built into them a grounding effect, right? you'll learn, if you do research on tactile objects, it does help to produce neuroplasticity in the brain. But there's a side benefit to that. Okay, and I won't go into neuroplasticity too much here today, but there's a side benefit of it. And the side benefit is grounding. So what happens is it helps the person to decrease their anxiety, their fears, but also increases attention and concentration, which, like, isn't that the best recipe that you want someone living with dementia to have, right? Is that they're calm, they're collected, they're attentive, they're focused, right? So you're going to introduce tactile objects that they enjoy. Now, we often introduce things like therapeutic dowels, and dowel therapy is something that is pretty popular in the industry. It is taboo. There are some folks that just don't believe it is for their mom or dad or for their residents, but there's a ton of research out there that shows how effective it is, especially if the person was a parent or a grandparent or, favorite aunt or uncle, something like that, right? So that's a nice tactile object to use. There's also pets. So if there are real live pets that the person has that they can use, bring that pet around during that time. Or if you don't have the luxury of that and they love pets, there are animatronic pets that can be used. So they're kind of lifelike animals that they can hold on to, they can pet, they can snuggle, they can hug, kiss, all those kinds of things, right? There's also some, in the industry, we have what's called weighted blankets, which is a heavy kind of blanket that goes on the person's lap, and it does provide a nice calming sensation. And some of the material are kind of real feel good to the fingertips that the person can start to kind of coax and use, which brings that calming effect on. Very similar to if you have worked with children who have ADHD or a level of Asperger's, using weighted blankets helps them to calm them down. So it's kind of using the same tool, just in this fashion that's more dignified. So you can use other things, like if they really did enjoy like knitting or crocheting, this would be a time that they can really concentrate on that too. So using tactile objects. The other thing too is the music, like we had talked about, is that non-biharmonic music. If you don't have access to something like that, you can always play white noise, which really is on any kind of sound machine, or if you just go onto YouTube, you can put in white noise. And white noise is that sound. And that's the sound we hear when we're in our mother's womb. And so it's a very calming sound for many people. So you try it out, right? See if it does calm that person. So these are just some examples of things that you can use. And what we recommend is doing it 30 minutes prior to the sundowning hour, okay? Because you want the person to start engaging with it before it hits, right? So it's about being proactive and not reactive. So the perfect day is that proactive approach. And the perfect day is something that myself and my business partner, Jessica Ryan, we had developed as a tactic of using the dementia connection model. And essentially is you are every day, 30 minutes prior to sundowning, you are using these types of tools with that person to mitigate the sundowning behaviors, right? We've actually seen to be able to eliminate them at times with people. It takes a little bit of time to do that. But what the person learns over about a 4-week period is that these things help me, right? They can't say that out loud, but they know it helps them. So they engage in them, and it kind of just skips that whole sundowning hour for them, or hours, depending on, the person. So there's that piece. Now, the perfect day, there's a little more in depth into that I go into in the book, but I talk about how do you set up your morning, how do you set up the afternoon, how do you set up that early evening right before sundowning, how do you set up the evening, right? To really have that full day of structure where this person is inundated with positive stimuli, because it has that immediate effect, like I mentioned. But with habilitation, reinforcing over and over again, they start to learn these are what these stimuli mean. So I've actually even seen that some residents, when I was working in the senior living communities, that they started to understand what time of day it was. Like they knew it was morning time, they knew it was afternoon, they knew it was dinner, right? Over that period of time when they started to have that stimuli that was consistent with them. So it just was an unbelievable way for them to maintain their independence for as long as they possibly could using the model. And so that's kind of a way to use that perfect day for sundowning. But I would highly recommend reading more about how to set up the whole day, because that's really going to set the person up for success. So again,
and that's
setting
a separate,
them up.
And that's a separate chapter in your book, or unique. Is that correct? The
Yes.
perfect day.
Yeah, it's not a whole chapter by itself, but it's incorporated into well, it's in the sundowning chapter, excuse me. So yeah.
All right, awesome. I want to make sure that you have time to talk about the Dementia Connection Institute. Can you tell us about that and where we can find more information, knowing that I'll post any kind of links that you want to the book, to the institute, et cetera.
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, my business partner and I opened up the Dementia Connection Institute here in January. Really what our vision is that people living with dementia can live their best quality of life in the time that they're with us without constraints, without negativity, without judgments, right? And how does that happen? That happens because the caregiver understands what's going on and they know how to easily take care of the person living with dementia in a way that provides that connection. So if we can educate and support caregivers, whether you're a professional or you're a family caregiver, with all the tools that you need, that is going to set the person living with dementia up for success and have that quality of life. Yeah. So our vision is to put these tools in the hands of those caregivers. And our mission is really to do that in a way. So we've set up our institute in a way to be able to do that, where we are providing a lot of education and training to not only organizations who work with seniors, but also privately to family caregivers too. And we're the first institute that serves both types of caregivers. Okay. And, I'll talk about my certification programs here in a minute, but we built a certification program that serves both professionals and family caregivers. And some people will say, well, how does a family caregiver able to get a certification where they get credentials similarly to a professional who's gone to school, and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And I remind them that a person living with dementia does not care what your degree is, what your job title is. They only care how they feel with you. So think about it. It's a certification for being able to learn how to connect in a better way. That's what it is, right? So it serves everybody. So we built the institute to be able to provide that education and training. So we do a lot of 1-hour seminars, for various entities. But we started to launch our certification programs here in the summer. We did a soft launch of both the Dementia Connection Specialist, so DCS, and the Dementia Connection Specialist Certified Trainer, so DCSCT. And we're live now here in September, where people can enroll if they go to our website and they can take these classes. But the idea with the trainers is that we're building a team who can provide this education and support to the people that we serve. And so we hope to grow our team. Now, the trainer portion is for healthcare professionals only. But the idea is to build that team so we can reach more family caregivers and more professional caregivers, as much as we can. And so we are small. It's just Jessica and I. And we have a team member who is our PR and marketing specialist, Janexi. But we're a small team here. And so we hope to build that team to help to deliver that mission and really create that vision. So people can go to our website at dementiaconnectioninstitute.org. We are also on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We also have a Facebook group called Facebook Movement for a lot of individuals to join and gain a lot of knowledge around non-pharmacological tools. And we're also on LinkedIn as well. So, but our website, like I mentioned, dementiaconnectioninstitute.org. They can go there. They can check out our seminar dates and what we have to offer, and they can also connect with us in that way.
Awesome. Very good. And like I said, we'll put any links in the description of this video and the audio podcast. Everybody, here's the book from Dr. Jennifer Stelter. And before we sign off, just one more mention of our sponsor, the Peace with Dementia Rosary Ministry for Cognitive Impairment. This is our commissioned artwork that we just had completed here. And this is available in prints like you see here. It's available in prayer cards. And just real briefly, if you don't know some of those in this picture, Our Lady of the Holy Rosary on this right here, down here, St. John the Evangelist, patron saint of caregivers. I didn't know that until years ago when getting involved in the ministry. St. Dymphna is right here, patron saint of cognitive disorders, mental disorders, anxiety, depression, etc. And St. Raphael, the archangel, the dispenser of God's healing graces, and a patron saint of those who are on a journey, because we are all on this this journey of dementia as professionals, as caregivers, and as those with the impairment, but with abilities. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Stelter. Thank you for being our guest. And I hope that everyone will reach out to Dr. Stelter and check out her resources, check out the book. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.